Well, when you start one of these things and you're on, um, often you realize that you're often talking to the void. It's a strange thing. So it's been an interesting time. You'll be noticing that I'm doing a lot less streaming and cutting down my social media access. Um, Unlike a lot of people who just kind of disappear. Uh, think about Freddie disappear, disappearing from the internet for a while. I think it's often time to sort of prune who has access to you. There's a temptation under current media guidelines that anybody who's an artist or a commoner makes themselves available 24 hours. Um, and that's a good way for perpetual burnout. And I was thinking about how a lot of the foibles of the left media discourse um, is related to being sucked into a lot of highly maladaptive antisocial trends. And while there are many things in your life that that you don't have control over, engaging in maladaptive social trends you totally have control over. Oh, I'm mad today. Don't worry. Um, and so I've been noticing a lot of like irony sick postings and people who troll themselves into incredibly weird positions, and then people who counter that in ways that essentially defend like parts of the status quo selectively. Um, and both those ways of dealing with discourse patterns, uh, they're destructive, and they make you subject to the winds of of gust uh, of gust of moral sentiment and political haze that makes you very easy to manipulate. And the only way to really fight against that, in my mind, is selectivity. To use the therapeutic buzzwords of the day, boundaries, right? And and striving for a kind of coherence and principle. Like, why are you doing something? Yeah, I've been reading Freddie's Substack, which of the Substacks that I've encountered is the one that I get the most out of. Mostly because he writes about education and he sees a lot of the same things I do, um, which is both left and right narratives about education being fundamentally dishonest. Uh, but if you look at the way social trends work, like he was writing about the trends in new atheism, um, a lot of the political movements have developed the same sort of weird tendencies as fandoms, which is something that if you see the rise and fall of new atheism from a decade ago, has a lot of the same fandom bounded logic. Well, you can't reverse that as an individual. You can just not play that game. You know, when people see how angry I get at like clout chasing on leftist social media, um, one of the reasons I get so angry is not because yeah, everyone's got to have a grift, right? Like in this world, for people's side gigs, hustlers got to hustle. Um, but it's more that if you hustle in certain ways, you have engaged in a kind of closed discourse pattern. You don't have a way out of it, and thinking that you do is usually hubris. So yeah. You so that's funny. You know what's funny about that is we recorded a lot of those like a year ago, so I probably don't even know what episode we're up to on the actual straight pod that's cleaned up, and you all the awful jokes and me yelling at Tom are taken out. Am I even in that one? I'm not in every episode. You should, although in the first episode, I get my history totally botched. Grimlock, you're right about that. So that's don't hustle, stand, be your own free man. Also, like, don't put up with BS and don't try to make people better. Like, particularly if they don't ask you to. It's just put on my mind, but yeah, I'm a teacher, right? And I'm an older brother. It comes up a lot. And so I have this instinct to like try to help people develop themselves. And I realized that to a certain degree, that's both arrogant on my part and super presumptuous that I can. And it leads me to tolerate a lot of shit that I should not tolerate. So, I've been trying to do less of it. And I only do streams and stuff and these things on things I really care about. You'll notice that while I have less listeners for sure for Alpha 2 Omega and for Modal Science, that's what I really care about. I also care about theorizing with a hammer videos, and I care about what we're doing here. Here on Varn Blog, you're going to see me exploring. I think tomorrow, Alex G is coming on to talk about Catherine Liu with me, and we're going to talk about what, if anything, makes sense in that book, and then what doesn't. And then I'm going to put that aside for now because that in its own self is getting stuck in a discourse chain, right? Whatever the current discourse chain is, people tend to want me to comment on once I start making my own opinions on it known. And that gets old. You're making the same point over and over again, particularly on stuff like the PMC issue, because it actually glosses over some of the biggest problems that I see developing in political economy right now. So, yeah. What do I mean by glosses over? I mean, it kind of posits a kind of ad hoc, incoherent theory that doesn't deal with some real issues, which is credentialization, increased rent-seeking markets, rentier economy growing, and left policy seeming to make it worse. These are all big issues, and I think they're tied into what could be called the PMC thesis, but they're not being discussed because the PMC thesis is used to fight a stupid culture war. I mean, in a particularly dishonest way. It's using. I mean, Mike Nair called it like using the Maoist tendency to invent a class to justify an ideological intervention. And I kind of think that's what's going on. So I mean, there are professional strata people who are a problem. I mean, like that's real, but it's weird how that definition, like when people throw PMC around, it just expands and contracts and expands and contracts. You never really know who it even applies to all the way. But you know what? I've said what I have to say about that. Continuing to beat that over the head is just going to drive me crazy, and it's just a way of like antagonistic social booting, and that works. It's a great marketing strategy. I mean, there's a reason why like leftist media uses essentially the rat beef strategy for spreads, because dopamine, outrage, and engaging in actually addictive behavior that is very personally destructive can build a media brand really fast. But it also, as I've been trying to tell people, it has a very short shelf life. Like those cycles, those cycles kind of grow through themselves and burn out. But yeah. But there's no reason to deal with a lot of leftist alienation or leftist toxicity or toxic discourses. I would say I would let people read what you're saying there. I don't entirely agree with that, Grimlock, because the Ehrenreich version of it has nothing to do with that. But its reappropriation does seem to be a way to fight a cultural war. What are good resources for structuring and organizing self-education, CDB? It depends on what you want to do. Like if you want to learn math, and it's one of the things where I think more leftists. I'm gonna take these headphones off. More leftists should learn math, right? It's like autodidacting that isn't great, but but you can actually just go and watch pretty decent educational videos. If you want to learn critical thinking skills, that's a completely different deal, and you do need someone to walk you through and train you on the kinds of questions to ask. Otherwise, you will get yourself into like oppositional defiant cul-de-sacs, right? So that's where a lot of conspiracy theory adjacent stuff jumps the shark, is autodidactism without anyone cultivating a certain kind of thinking. Yeah, I know that. I mean, I've read all the James Burnham books. I know the history. A not friend of mine, I don't know who this is. I've never talked to Adolf Reed Jr., but I would be open to talk to Adolf or Torrey Reed and I do have the people who could set that up. I know that Pascal over at This Is Revolution really buys into a version of the PMC thesis, and I do not. The managerial elite thesis, the academic. What's funny though is like when like someone like Catherine Loon writes about it, they pretend that the managerial elite thesis is the same thing, or that when Lash was talking about bureaucratic tendencies and intellectual elite tendencies. Would I speak to Norman? Yeah, I'd speak to anybody. Would I let Norman Finkelstein go off on what he may go off on? Maybe not. I mean, I think you let people talk about what they're specialist in. Do you think people should read philosophy and sociology before studying Marxism proper? It would help. It would help at least to know some basic Aristotelian category parsing and some basic logic. Well, yeah, that's been an issue. Is like people are using PMC the way Trotskyists used to use petit bourgeois against people who weren't petit bourgeois, but like they would be like, you're acting in a petit bourgeois consciousness or whatever. It's just a lazy form of thinking, and it's a lazy form of class analysis. I don't think Pascal is just doing that though. I think there's something else there, but I think he's been largely convinced by Adolph Jr. So I think my friend Jean wants us to have a conversation about this, because I do think there are things that Pascal's talking about that are real. I think there's even things that Catherine Lou's talking about that are real, although Catherine Lou's particularly incoherent repackaging of it is the packaging of it that's allowed to go on Jacobin and Chapo, and then I get a lot of pushback where everybody else is clearly kind of doing some red Toryism. But let's talk about like a deeper rooted problem with this, right? We can talk about our ideological enemies for all day, but a lot of this is rooted, and I hate to say anything nice about Jody Dean, but when Jody Dean was writing on Comrades, is a lot of what makes this stuff attractive is how deeply unattractive a lot of left wing, both online and in real life, frankly, tendencies are. I mean, alienated people are alienating. And while I would never tell people to cut everyone out of their life or anything like that, I'm not like any of that defoo nonsense, that culty crap. But I would say, he does. It's just that critique goes back to like Harold Cruz. And I mean, interestingly, Harold Cruz had the same critique as like Reed and Pascal, but had the opposite view of the class that was causing it. And so there's just a lot of issues, I think, where people are honestly, sincerely trying to use categories to clarify things, but those categories themselves muddle things, right? And that's coming out of an impulse to respond to a couple of deeply unattractive trends, both in the left milieu, but also in like the left of capital, or like the Democrats or whatever. Really, that's interesting. He said opposite things before in the past. So people who are listening to this, Pascal has also implicitly denied the existence of black bourgeoisie. We actually talked about the black bourgeoisie in an early stream that I did on a Saturday with the This Is Revolution guys, and the guy who does a show on toys is actually really entertaining. Well, yeah, I don't think Nietzsche was entirely wrong that a lot of left wing traits are basically botched religion, specifically botched Christianity. It comes out in secular people who don't know another way to live or think. So, yeah, Danny Larson from Toy Galaxy. No, I mean a lot of black people don't own capital, but that's not all black people. That'd be a weird claim. I'd have to listen to it in context. Oh, yeah, it's the comprador class stuff. I don't like comp. They had mixing PMC and comprador class stuff is like really mixing up a bunch of different kind of bizarre analysis. Yeah, so I think when I was talking to Andy, he said a lot of these trends are just online trends, and I argued with him. I'm like, no, young people adopt this in real life. I've seen it. I've even seen it in kids I teach. You are instigating and teaching people very maladaptive habits, that engage in worsen alienation, but get engagement by alienating people. And it's easy to blame social media for this, right? And social media does make it worse because social media is designed to keep you engaged and designed to encourage you to do some things to keep the people engaged, but it's not the problem. Like, it's not what's driving these trends. It's like a larger social milieu that's rewarding it. Um, I obviously need to listen to a lot more Pascal to know what's going on there. But I have been asked to come back on the show, and they'll probably come on here sometime too. So yeah. Yeah, I've actually, yes. I think if you talked about, and actually, I don't, I think if you need to actually separate professional and managerial culture as well. Like professional culture, managerial culture are not the same thing. Like this is one thing that Lash is clear on. Bureaucratic culture and academic culture are related, but they're not the same. And Keens are keen to learn any patterns that work in their social circles, even if they're maladaptive and ultimately destructive. And like this is why I don't have a particularly negative view on like the kids these days, because all kids these days are inherently different from the prior generation and also not that different at all. I work with them, but I do see some things culturally rewarded that are really bad. What I will say though is there's other things about kids that I teach now. Um, I mean, yeah, it's 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 an ideological construction that serves a particular section of actually a couple of different classes. So, and a striver, ladder climber, clout chaser mindset. What's interesting about that is that's not what they're just talking about in PMC culture, though. They're also talking about like virtue signaling, which I actually do think is an issue. And I know people don't like that because right wingers, because right now we also live in this time where most people are so intellectually lazy, they just classify anything that their cultural opponents say as inherently bad. Um, yeah. So virtue signaling is a problem, and it's also not a problem. I mean, like it's a natural thing that happens. It's only a problem when it substitutes for actually doing anything. Um, it becomes very similar to like the business who donates $5,000 to a charity and spends $1 million promoting it. But one of the things I'm just out here to tell you is, despite how messed up society is or whatever, some of these things you can stop. They are within your personal control. But what you can't do is try to engage in it and change it at the same time. I realize that you cannot let the people who say idiot shit define everything. It is very easy to find the worst examples of any moron on the internet, and guys, you're making these people millionaires at this point. Um, What I find interesting about most of the reactions, and I'm gonna throw grandmas over here because I'm gonna come down over this a little bit. I do often think that like if you counter signal anything, you're essentially actually defining yourself by what you're countering. It's an inherently reactionary position. So yes, I I agree that counter virtue signaling or vice signaling even is also counterproductive. But what I won't say is just pretending like this stuff isn't happening because some of your enemies happen to talk about it idiotically is 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 it's letting your enemies define you for one thing and define what you will and will not talk about. And it's also like a very good way to pretend like you're fighting the status quo, but absolutely not be. And that's the thing with both the virtue and the vice signaling, right? Is like it's not doing anything about anything except for maybe making some people rich through clout. What other thing about students? I will finish my thought. This is a very legitimate criticism of me is when I respond to you guys, I sometimes move on to the next thing before I've said everything prior. Um, I was saying that students, it's interesting, right? Students are much more likely to bully online than I've ever seen, but they're not likely to bully in person. But they are like when I look at students now, they are likely to say outrageous things even in person to get attention. Now, students have always done that to some degree, but it's become a strategy that it's highly rewarded. Like, and I can't say that I blame students for that. I don't blame, people who are developing their sense of identity for every weird maladaptive tick they pick up from the larger culture, but I do blame adults for it. Um, I, I'm really mixed on that stuff. I do agree with you that in some ways the old ways of bullying were more honest, but I also do think there has been real social inclusiveness progress made that I like. I don't see people make fun of special needs kids nearly as much as even 10 years ago, and definitely since when I was in school. Um, People are much cooler about like accepting people's sexuality and whatnot. I mean, like that's even gotten better in the last 10 years too. Even in a conservative place like Utah. Um, but yeah, I what I think happens is to go back to what I was saying is when you're constantly in counter signaling mode, like the left critics of the left, right? One, there's a kind of ideological narcissism involved in that. And I do agree that, like, historically speaking, criticizing I don't even know what you're talking about. I'll flash it up there. I don't know who Nelson Muntz is. Um, I do agree that criticizing the left is how the left grows if it is done in a substantive and not just rhetorical way. And counter signaling is almost always rhetorical. It is performative, and so much um, of that world is performative. Well, I mean, I live in Utah, and but I'm from Georgia, and when I started teaching in 2007, there were some things that were allowed to be said that would not be allowed to be said now, even here. So, well, I'm not saying that there is no teasing in schools. I'm saying that there's much, much less of it. Although I would love to know what you think is this valued social function served by teasing. Um, oh yeah, there's a lot less of that. There's not none. I mean, there's still. This is this is not to say Zoomers don't have social hierarchies or anything dumb like that. Um, it's just what it's about is different. Um, I see. It's social reductive. It's social reductivism. Yeah, you just better hope you can back that up, because when if someone, for example, mocks me, and because I do operate on honor culture assumptions, for pomposity. If they're correct and I'm being pompous, I'll laugh it off because it's a nice corrective and it is socially valuable. I agree. If they're incorrect, I'm gunning for them for the rest of their life. Honor matters. That's the Overton window principle again, and that is about social compliance and change. Um, so it's useful. It's useful to virtue signal if it is truly transgressive to social norms in a pro-social way. If you have antisocial social norms, which is a strange thing to say, antisocial social norms, how can that be? But this is why I found the whole debate on transgression or not transgression on the left to be just dumb. Because what are you transgressing for? Like, like, so transgression for its own sake, who really cares? But if you're aiming to change, some kind of social norm, then yes, it matters. But there's also parrhesia, right? Like, I'm probably mispronouncing it because it's a Greek word, and Erica can correct me. But parrhesia is the ability to speak truth to power. And the thing is, parrhesia is only powerful if it comes with a loss of social status, or a way to really that really endangers the social order. There is a usefulness to transgressive parrhesia, to transgressive truth telling. And that is a kind of virtue signaling, and it can change social norms. But it's only effective if it's actually against social norms. You're actually, speaking truth to power, and it's a truth everyone already believes. You're not actually speaking truth to power, right? Yeah, you do always run the risk of getting grudge. Yeah, Nagel's critique was transgression was attractive, exciting, and energizing, but also alienating to mass politics. I'm of the opinion there's almost no way to be transgressive to co-opt and lost its meaning. Um, well, anything can be commodified. That's always been true. Parrhesia, parrhesia. As a Southerner, I refuse to recognize that there's a difference between any vowel. Yeah, I'm not against white mocking. The thing is, that's not the same thing as bullying. Um, it really was a serious problem for me, Erica, when I was in Korea, because vowel enunciation is super important to that language. And as a Southerner, I kind of don't do it like ever. I diphthong everything. And while you don't hear it, my Southern accent's mostly gone because I have picked up professional social norms to be part of the PMS, the professional managerial strata. I guess I'm not. I don't know. I'm a professional, I guess, but I'm not a manager of anybody. Well, that's not next year. I technically am. Exactly. And people seem to conflate the two, like mocking and bullying. Yeah, I don't think they're the same thing. I mock people all the time, but I don't try to go after their key. Like I don't try to just bring people low to do it. Um, yeah, I agree. A lot of transgressive humor is punishing down. Well, it's because they're French. I don't know. I'm tempted to go all Nietzsche on you guys and just Nietzsche, and I'm going to mispronounce it over and over and over again. Nietzsche, 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 Nietzsche. But Nietzsche um, said that what Nietzsche said about people's moral values, after the death of God, in his hyperbolic, metaphorical way, I think is actually true. That um, a lot of the more destructive elements of Christian morality are actually more pronounced in secular society. Um, and it's something that leftists need to be really dealing with. But again, like I said, if you have a problem with a discourse pattern, you can't probably change the discourse pattern, but you cannot engage in it. So if you think that like a lot of the silly antics um of elite students at liberal arts schools in the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest really is a problem, a lot of times the best thing you can do is not talk about it. Not because you shouldn't be able to tell the truth, but like you have to look at it in like the lieu of the stakes of the larger society. And a couple of activists being jackasses at an elite college is has very little knockdown effect to the larger society. That's wrong. They are very close. Southern English and African American vernacular English are very, very close. To say they're not even close is just wrong. They're directly related because those cultures are interrelated. There's a difference in enunciation patterns and what is emphasized. But for example, a lot of Black vernacular English actually tracks pretty closely to like late 18th century, um, late 18th century patterns in English because they're influenced by Scottish Irish, and furthermore, there's a lot of inflect of West African on Southern English. What I will say is like any ethnic group, African American vernacular English, or let's just call it Black vernacular English because it's a little bit more honest, um, is is pretty diverse. As is white Southern English too. Um, it's diverse by region, by microregion, and by social class, and on all those categories. Like I know when someone grew up, from a lower middle class planter society in like the Panhandle of Florida by what they say and don't say. Um, and there's a lot of information conveyed in it. Yeah, Southern Scot and Scotch Irish with some African inflections because of their interrelationship between um, black and white, particularly. No, it doesn't have a secret coupler. Particularly if it's lower class. So again, it's class specific. When you talk about white and black people as monoliths, you're generally being a moron. So they sound pretty similar to me, but maybe it's because I grew up around both. Um, and I can code switch both. So that's because Americans don't know that like Welsh and Kent are a thing. They pretty much know Cockney, and that's it. If you're lucky. Here's the thing that I found interesting about it. Uh, SZ Zoller. Um, what class strata is your lower class Louisiana family from? But Louisiana's weird, even from the standpoint of the South, because there's more influences there than you have in other places. Um, so what I'm trying to say though is like if you gave, for example, when they were doing the Ebonics test, if you gave that to white people in the South, they could more easily understand it if they were lower middle class than upper class white people in the Northeast, because a lot of the diction construction is similar. Um, but it's a very fascinating, like you're getting into a weird thing that I'm really fascinated with is how extensive is the overlap between black and white culture. Are really black and Scotch Irish Scotch Irish planter and Appalachian culture is to um because the other thing that I was implying, there's a pretty big difference in like class accents in the South. Now, what's been interesting is the way Southern accents have become a cultural signifier for some kind of cultural blue collarness, and even in like people speaking in vague Southern accents in places that don't historically have them. Um, that's new, and it's a weird cultural signifier issue. Um, I love British micro regional rivalries. You make Americans seem like anyway. We're off on a weird tangent now. I was talking about something else. A bunch of white people talking about African American English dialects. Probably not the greatest idea, right? Um, although, like I said, I grew up in a mostly in an area that's about 50-50 split, which is rare. And my neighborhood was a transitional neighborhood, which is code word for used to be a white suburb where some very well off black people moved in, um, even though it was not a well off neighborhood. You know how the traditional liberal sociology on this is actually correct. Usually, like the very first black people in a white neighborhood are richer than the white people in that neighborhood because that's what they were allowed to be there. UK breaking up, good or great? Great. Yeah, I know. Criollo is it does mean the same thing as Creole. Um, but it's confusing. I know that from Spanish, but I was actually realizing that to to people who don't speak Spanish, that part of the conversation was probably pretty opaque. So I like defined it. Creoles in the Criollo in the Spanish context in Latin America means European descended. I have a strong Southern accent coming from an upper middle class family. I don't doubt you. It's a different accent though. Like planter class accent's um very different than a working class accent. Although maybe you do affect it. I've totally lost mine. I used to have one. Um, in fact, see if I can actually speak like I used to speak. And actually, even this is a little bit more high class than I would have actually spoke. I used to could do things like that. You will even notice the phrasing of a past future conditional tense, which that tells you how sad being poor in the South is, that we have a past future conditional. So in the past, I could have thought of this thing to happen in the future, but now I can't. It's not even possible to dream of. I used to could have. You can tell some very interesting things about mindsets through grammar. Yeah, Creole in Louisiana means Black Creole. It usually means mixed race. How comically over Cajun that accent's fake as hell. How comically over Cajun was Gambit's accent on the X-Men cartoon? Unbelievably. Um, uh, Zollinger uh, is from Louisiana. I have a lot of family from Louisiana. It's the same reason I have family in Canada. Actually, it's the same family. It's where my last name is a corruption of it. So I don't know. They're Welsh. It was appropriately cartoonish for a cartoon, but yes, it's kind of yeah. Is being Welsh like being Canadian and being American? Like no one outside of Anglo North America can tell the difference, and most of the people in Anglo North America can't really either, except one has mildly better healthcare than the other. But it really means something to one side of that debate. Yeah, but Philip Zimbardo was also full of shit. So you talk about pop psychologists that I kind of hate. But I do think that there's a point about language. I don't buy into Sapphire Whorfism. Um, oh God, the Cornish. They actually the Cornish and the Manx actually do have like legitimate longstanding grievances. Um, I'm actually pro Northern Independence Party. I'm not usually into micro nationalisms, but yeah, software war theory is total bullshit. There's no backing for it. I agree. But yeah, I know. It's just like the more I study, like particularly a Stanford prison experiment, and he should probably go to prison for that. You should tell some of my comrades about Murdoch to own news enterprise. Anyway, I'll shut up. So recap some key points, and I'm just going to do question A since I have gone. I had no idea I was going to go on a weird dive into dialect land. Um, I actually wanted to talk about modern psychology because the appropriations of modern psychology, both the appropriations of social psychology in the CBD standard paradigm and appropriations of psychoanalysis, tend to be used in the worst way. Um, if you're not dealing in a clinical or therapeutic setting, and even then, sometimes I'm a little worried about it. Have the replication crisis. You have the fact that a lot of your presentations of psychological studies are really watered down. Like take early CBT and compare it to positive psychology, and they're like night and day different. Yeah, I'm going to talk about art actually. Yeah, I do wonder if I should just do embrace my inner linguistics. Psychoanalytical Marxism. Yeah, it seems interesting. Part of the problem is that Marxism, because it's fully interested in social development, doesn't really Marx didn't deal with the individual mind that much, and he trusted a lot of the psychology of his day. Um, that's actually a really big problem in Marxism, because when you make predictions on what people are going to do based off of their material inputs, but you don't have a strong theory of mind and how individuals respond to material inputs, you actually have to fill in that gap somehow. And people have tried to figure out that gap a bunch of ways. Psychoanalytic ones is the most obvious, and it's the one that humanities people like because they don't really have to know that much about actual neurology to talk about it. But you can see it with people appropriating. I mean, I do this, but people over appropriating game theory in Marxism, over appropriating rational choice theory in Marxism, over appropriating all kinds of different mental models to kind of bridge the gap and make the thing where, I mean, arguably some of the Althusserian weirdness is an attempt at this too. So yeah. So one of the things I was going to tell you is instead of complaining about what we hate all the time, we do need to talk about what we like, right? Like it's easy to just criticize the left and talk about how crap it is, because I mean, like it's always like large. Let me give you a rule before I move on to the next thing. Unfortunately, um, thoughts on dialectical behavior therapy. I think it has very little to do with dialecticism, Marxism. It from what I've read in my dealings with counselors, and I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not pretending to be. Dialectical behavior therapy is useful for certain kinds of borderline personality disorder, and that's about it. But it is useful for that. Psychoanalysis doesn't seem that copacetic with materialism. You end up talking about orgone energy and stuff. Well, that's one form of it. I don't have thoughts on Christopher Alexander. Sorry. um, I have not read everything. So let's talk about what we like. And I'm going to talk about two poetry books from people I like. I have right here. I want to talk about this today. I think I can legally read these, right? Like not the whole book, but like a poem from it. Thoughts on Talib? I'll answer that in a second. So I'm going to read. Yeah, I'll talk about Talib in a minute. I'm going to read from Kim Adonisio's new book, Now We're Getting Somewhere. I've met Kim Adonisio a couple of times. She's kind of fun. High Desert, New Mexico. Temple of the Rattlesnakes Religion. Deluge and Heat Surge. Crash of the Atoms Rapture. Ugh. Night blackens like a violin, and bright flower falls with the kitchen of heaven. This is where the seam begins to loosen, where you can walk for miles in any direction, rabbit, lizard, raven, insect, drone, and almost forget the shame of being human. Smoke tree, sage. Not everything is broken. Horses appear at the remote cabin to stand outside and wait for you to come with a single apple. Abandon your despair. You who enter here forsaken. The wind is saying something. Listen. It's a pretty standard poem, but I like it. I like it a lot because I also, when I'm upset, like to go out into the mountains or the desert or to the ocean or basically any place where I can get away from people, and with natural things. And it shows up in my own poetry a lot. Kim Adanisha doesn't usually write poetry like that. She usually writes very sarcastic, kind of whiskey filled female Bukowski poems. Um, but I thought that poem was different. It was interesting because it was so different and in some ways so stripped bare. Um, you guys are going to talk about psychoanalytic Marxism. Yeah, I make fun of the Red Library people a lot. I like them. They're great dudes, actually, but I don't think they're like. I think if you actually read Lacan and that Zizek's Lacan, you can't come to the conclusions they come to. But I'll admit, Lacan's so vague, you can pretty much project anything on it you want. That's why I always talk about Zizek's Lacan or Bruce's Lacan. What's Bruce? What's that guy's name? I talk about different people's Lacan because Lacan is like the king of the gnomic stuff. But I actually think a lot of Lacanian psychoanalysis is quite conservative in its assumptions. And so I'm going to read from another book. This is author, I believe it's C's. I actually don't know. I've never met him. His is collected, come out recently. And it's really good. Like, I love this guy. It's a big influence on my own work. And I'm going to pick one to read from you, and then I'll go back to talking philosophy. Yeah, Bruce Fink, thank you. The dream... excuse me. Nope. I'm going to re-say that. Now, this is in the collection, The Glass Constellation, which is his collected work. Which I hope this doesn't mean he's dying soon, because that would be sad. But this is from the 1987 collection, River, if you want to find the original. The leaves of a dream are the leaves of an onion. 1. Red oak leaves rust in the wind. Inside a dream, you dream the leaves, scatter on dirt, and feel it as an instance of the chance configuration to your life. All night you feel red horses galloping in your blood, hear a piercing siren, and are in love with the inexplicable. You walk to your car, find hazard lights blinking, find a rust brown knife, a trout, a smashed violin in your hands, and then you wake inside the dream to find tangerines ripening in the silence. You peel the leaves of the dream as you would peel the leaf off an onion. The layer of the dream has no core, no essence. You find a tattoo of a red scorpion on your body. You simply laugh, shiver in the frost, and step back into the world. A Galapagos turtle has nothing to do with the world of neutrinos. The ecology of the Galapagos island has nothing to do with a pair of scissors. The cactus by the window has nothing to do with the invention of the wheel. The invention of the telescope has nothing to do with a red jaguar. No, the invention of scissors has everything to do with the invention of a telescope. A map of the world has everything to do with the cactus by the window. The world of the quark has everything to do with a jaguar circling in the night. The man who sacrifices himself and throws a Molotov cocktail at a tank has everything to do with a sunflower that bends to the light. 3. Open a window and touch the sun, or feel web maple leaves flicker in the rain. Watch a blue crab scuttle in clear water, or find a starfish in dirt. Describe a color green to the colorblind, or build a house out of pain. The world is more than you surmise. Take the pines, green-black, slashed by light, etched by wind, on the water, cross the whip-tide body of water, describe 1,000 iridescent needles to the blind albino Kahumaranda. In the bubble chamber, in the magnetic field, an electron spirals and spirals into the center, but the world is more than such a dance, a spiraling to the point of origin, a spiraling out in the form of a wet leaf, a brew clab, or a greenhouse. And this goes on for about, I'll read the whole thing because it goes on for a few more pages. But 4. The heat ripples ripple the cactus. Crushed green glass in the parking lot or a pile of rhinoceros bones gives off heat, though you might not notice. The heat of a star can be measured under a spectrometer, but not the heat of the mind, or the heat of Angkor Wat, or the rumber of Angkor Wat gives off heat. So do apricot blossoms in the night, green fish, black bamboo, or a fisherman fishing in the snow. And an angstrom of the shift turns the pleasure into pain. The ice that rips the fingerprint off your hand gives off heat, and so does each moment of existence. A red leaf, disintegrating in the dirt, burns with the heat of an acetylene frame, and heat ripples off the tin roof of an adobe house. It is simply the heat you see. What is the secret to a Guarneri violin? Wool dipped in an indigo bath turns bluer when it oxidizes into air. Marat is changed in the minds of the living. A shot of tequila is related to Antarctica shrinking. A crow in a bar or a red snapper on ice is related to a 12-tone method of composition. What does the tuning of a timpani have to do with the smell of your hair? To feel at 30 you have come this far. To see a bell over a door as a bell over a door. To feel the care and precision of this violin is no mistake, nor is the sincerity and the shudder of passion by which you live. And last part 6. Crush an apple, crush a possibility. No single method can describe the world. Therein is the pleasure of chaos, of leaves in the mind. A man slumped over a desk in an attorney's office is a parrotfish caught in a seaweed mass. A man who turns to the conversation in a bar is a bluefish hooked on a cigarette. Is the desire and collapse of desire in an unemployed carpenter the instinct of a salmon to leap upstream? The smell of eucalyptus can be incorporated into a theory of aggression. The pattern of indifference in a hologram replicates the apple, the knife, the horsetail on the table, but misses the sense of chaos, distorts in its singular view, then touch, shine, dance, sing, be, becoming, be. And that is the entirety of the 6-page poem, The Leaves of a Dream or The Leaves of an Onion. And I could talk about why I love that, the way that he incorporates surrealistic imagery, but it's not totally surrealistic, actually. There's actually analogical meanings to all of it. The way he incorporates science and scientific thinking into dream imagery. Very relevant for people who want to talk about Zizek, right? So I love that book so much. You guys should check it out. And it's available. I think it's like $35 or something. It's not cheap, unfortunately, because it's new. And I might read you guys a poem that I revised recently. I'll read you one of my own. I'm very careful about this. But I might just publish this one myself, so it doesn't matter if I read it here. It'll still show up in a collection, right? This is Diaspora and Fugue. It's by me. The commuter bus slags through the rim road traffic on the outskirts of Cairo. The car seems to rut in the desert heat. I read Elaine Dundee and wonder about Paris in the 1950s. Affairs with playwrights and half-moth-eaten memories of debutante balls, but I am sweating bullets and sipping a bottle of hibiscus tea, overly sweetened. Sound filters through the rattling windows, colors the pages of my page, and grits my drink. Past is in the page, and we like to think memory is a nation, but often it is barely even the fragments of a place. 5 years prior, flying in souls fluorescent in neon haze, red electric crosses against the overcrowded horizon, and swastikas on the subway maps denoting temples. I remember realizing that the skyline was an emblem of a prolonged first divorce. Then I couldn't get the powder blue sleeve of a flight attendant out of my memory. Flash in the blurred corner of my eye, the things you see. I noticed a man's gray galabea through the dirty windshield, his hem frayed as he inched towards the highway to cross traffic against a cloudless sky. Minarets like sewing needles jutting through the tapestry of concrete and sandstone, punctuated by flashes of ornately colored prayer rugs. Before I left America, I asked my professor why John Donne only wrote about women and about God, and generally in that order. The promise of beauty starts in touch, but ends in more distance as the body starts to go brittle, the brain softening with memory rot. And what do you have? The two releases, prayer in the body and prayer of it. But I don't know why clothing dominates the edges, cutting fabrics into memory, hoping I would be woven into the arms of some woman and her story would contain an anecdote of a traveler just moving through. We would mutter unintelligible words to each other, like sand in my tea. We begin in movement, but end in stillness. And like women lost in Paris, wondering what is so funny about men mumbling into their cocktails. Memory is not a foreign country. It isn't even that reliable. But in it, almost every kiss feels like friendship. So that's mine. It's not in a book yet. It's not in any of the collections that are currently available or will be available in the future. That's a poem that I wrote about 6 years ago and rewrote 2 days ago. Here's the book I read, the long poem. This book is Author Sees, that's SZE. The Glass Constellation, New and Collected Poems, winner of the National Book Award from Copper Canyon Press 2021. There, I give you all the necessary biographic data on this book. And then what the other thing that I read was a brief poem from Now We're Getting Somewhere from my Kim Adonisio, which is her newest collection of poems. Available, who is this available by? Norton. Also 2021. So, if I had the book, I have a book where I was reading where someone actually quotes Zizek in a poem. I don't have it on me right now. Oh, is it back here? It's probably upstairs. I don't feel like going to get it. Oh well. Yeah. So, and the poem you heard by me is Diaspora and Fugue. It was about a lot of things. It's about a lot of things because all my poems is about a lot of things. Do I describe to consciousness as emergent property from matter? Probably. Thomas Nagel. Is Varn a gamer? Hell no, I'm not a gamer. My first wife was a gamer, though. Yeah. Poor little out for Sam Hamill of Copper Canyon, one of the co-founders of Copper Canyon Press, and he died a while back. I mean, like we were in dialogue for a long time. I interviewed him. He died like 4 years ago, I think. I play 80s arcade games. Sometimes. I like Centipede, particularly when I had the big ball. I used to play it on as a kid. If you crowdfund a stitch for Barn and also get me a classic arcade console of Centipede, I will play it on Twitch. How's that for a grift? But I will never play Call of Duty anything. No, I grew up playing. I did play Mortal Kombat 1 through 3 as a kid. We always sneak off because like I had friends who had more money, so they had uh the consoles to play that. Like I was playing like an 80s Nintendo that was bought secondhand, like well into the mid 90s. Sounds like Rio. Oh, Riot. I was about to say, how dare you compare me to Duran Duran? Do, do, do. I've been listening to a lot of 80s music, like a lot of 80s music lately. I don't know what's been up with that. Like going back and listening to early Elvis Costello records and John Cale records from the 70s and 80s. I don't know. Does Ezra have a Twitch? I know Sophie has a Twitch, and that's Trans Revolution. So I think maybe Esri co-monitors Trans Revolution with Sophie. I mean, Sophie's like busy being a nurse these days, so are studying to be. Yeah. I liked what is that game? Mine Minecraft, not Minecraft. No, Minefield, Mine Search, Mine something. Little game that had the squares and you blew yourself up. Uh, so okay, so I can say Esri is surplus value on Twitch. Okay, good. Minesweeper got canceled. What did it get canceled for? What could Minesweeper do? Ugh. Don't tell me it's something horrible like I don't know, like how I can't watch Ren and Stimpy anymore. Tragic. Uh, all the red and black flags are true. Oh man. So it really did get canceled for. It's funny because that was an issue in like when you would go through South Asia, right? Like if you're like going to Angkor Wat, you don't leave the trail because parts of Cambodia are still pretty mined up. Ren and Stimpy is its creator was a groomer, a really particularly pernicious groomer. So it's like Thing Sweeper. That's a weird, in a world where we play where we play games where we literally blow people to bits all the time. Reskinning that innocuous of a game is really strange, but whatever. To each their own, I guess. As our society has moved to being like my fundamentalist parents, and we can't watch it. Oh man. Fuck, Mary, kill communist bloc leaders. Uh, no. This is all answers to that. Yeah, there's still mines alive in the north side. The DMZ is a very strange. I've visited the DMZ a couple times and the DMZ a couple times, and it's weird how it's kind of it's half a military zone and half a theme park. Like when I say it's half a theme park, I'm not joking. Like there's not rides, but there's all this weird tourist stuff that's very strange. But you also can't look in certain directions, and if you wander off the path, you could get blown up. So It does feel like something out of a J.G. Ballard novel, frankly. I was there last time I was at the DMZ was 2012, right before I left the country, Korea, after being there for 3.5 years. No, 2013. Yeah, I left in 2013, not 2012. Yeah, well, both sides actually had propaganda villages. There's also that village that the South keeps around, partly out of agreement with the people there, but partly as a counter propaganda village. What should you read from J.G. Ballard? High Rise, Crash, Atrocity Exhibition, the collected short stories, but High Rise being the most important one. And then Atrocity Exhibition being the second most important one. And then Crash being the third. Man, I love me some J.G. Ballard. Toonami greater than Nickelodeon. Okay, we are really off topic, peeps. Yes, Empire of the Sun is based off of Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard, which is an autobiographical novel. It's not like the rest of his work. The rest of his work is either like new wave science fiction or it's social commentary, dystopian. I am not a young millennial or a Zoomer. I am a Gen Xer. Barely a Gen Xer, mind you, but I am. Or Zennial. Or whatever that micro generation is, the Toonami generation. I watched Toonami when I was in high school. Concrete Island's worth reading, yeah. Drowned World, all the Drowned World and Crystal World are all good. I haven't actually. The thing is, when you ask me like what J.G. Ballard you should read, I would just say all of it. I mean, I haven't read every novel myself, but I've read the three world books, the collected short stories, Crash, High Rise, Concrete Island, User's Guide to Millennium, and Empire of the Sun and the Kindness of Women. Those are two autobiographical books. The last two. You're like the generational equivalent of off-brand cereal. Yeah, I am. Old enough to remember the Cold War, young enough to have had internet in my high school library. If I could live in a sci-fi utopia, what that Ian Banks, The Culture. I'd live in the culture. That's not so bad. Grimlock, you'd live in 40K. Warhammer 40K. It's literally the metaphor for fascism. Yes, I've read Ursula K. Le Guin. Not all of it. But yeah, you should watch. You should read and watch Stalker and know that they're very different things because they're about very different things. Yes, yeah, you could be a commie weeb. Yep, I know. Jameson and Zizek have lots to answer for. Zizek Delinda asked. Oh my god. My earliest political memories are the Tiananmen Square thing and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the Iran-Contra crisis. Those are the only things I remember really being talked about a lot when I was a kid. I also have a vague memory of being told that Reagan got shot, but I do not remember it happening. And I have a false memory of watching the Challenger explosion, which I know I did see, but not when it actually happened. Maybe we were listening to something about it, though. It was in the evening. I don't know. But I know we talked about it at school so much that I have created that false memory that a lot of people have that they saw it in school. So they damaged the discourse with loose citations. Yeah, I mean, Jameson also like writing about Chinese stuff without consulting anyone who reads Mandarin or. Yeah, I do remember seeing it in school. But I don't think I don't think we watched it live. I'm pretty sure like that's a totally confabulated memory on my part. The Clinton impeachment happened my senior year of high school when I was in government class. It was fun. Zollinger, you local here in Mormonlandia in the great nation of Deseret? Nihilism. Nihilism is the only cultural characteristic that I know of Zoom millennials. And I maybe having lived through COVID as a young adult, that's going to be a pretty interesting thing. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for brightening up my day. I kind of came in a little bit tired and bummed out. I've been purging my social media of a lot of people who just get me down. You're an Idahoer. That's not a whole lot better. If you're ever around SLC, hit me up. Don't come to my house, but I'll meet you somewhere. Hopefully, after we're all properly vaccinated and the world is no longer in a weird haze. I'm gonna my long-standing grudge against Jacobin aside. It's funny because Ben Burgess and I are we're not close, but we've known each other for a long time and we're kind of friends. And I've always hated Jacobin. I do think they do some good reporting on Latin America sometimes, although sometimes it's through pink colored glasses. So I'm going to be talking to Gene Badgelon about getting some foreign policy specialists who are left adjacent, like Koba and Besser and some other people like that, who take anti-imperialism seriously but are not, gray zone pilled or whatever. Good news sources on geopolitics. I don't really know. I mean, like, my natural inclination is to tell you, learn to read Spanish so you can read non-English media and compare it to English media. It's not that it's they aren't that bad. Did I say they were always bad? No, but I won't write for them. The reason why I don't get big is I don't write articles. and I don't do the press junket, and I don't want to. I have a day job. I am writing a book, which I think will do fairly well because of the topic, and I will be willing to, like, if someone wants to publish an excerpt of the book in Jacobin, I won't not. I'm not going to be nicer. But I'm plenty nice to people in person. Like Bhaskar Sankara, it's not a person I would be mean to personally, but I would tell him what I say on here personally. I just wouldn't, like, challenge him to a fight. I'm really oppositional. When you see me be really oppositional, it's usually with Doug Lane, and there's a reason for that, because that's kind of the pattern of Doug and my engagement for literally a decade. So, like, will Zero Books publish your last book? That is Doug's plan. If Shalin and I finish it, which I had to take a break because I read like 4 Lash books in a row and about 50 articles, and I like need to go back to it. But my brain was just like full up with nothing but Lash. And we've written the intro and like two chapters, and we kind of know what we're doing. We kind of know what we're doing there. I'm focusing a lot on Lash's early work and then looking at the late work to see what is different about it, because I do think something is. I don't think you can. I do think if you read Lash uncritically, it can be bad, or if you read Lash without knowing all that he's talking about. Like, culture of narcissism isn't about what people think it's about. The Revolt of the Elites, he didn't even want published. His daughter had him published. It's like, it's stuff like that. Yeah, I didn't agree with Michael on everything he said on foreign policy, but I do think he was a better answer than a lot of other places. Gene Bachelon's a person to follow. He's well, I've only written books of poetry other than this. Well, I've written a book of short stories, but that's never going to see print. My thoughts on Talib. Talib actually makes some pretty good observations about statistical tales and over concluding from linear trends, but he's also kind of an asshole. So, and his libertarianism is bizarre. But I do like how much he picks up on picks on race realist nerds and stuff like that. Like, it's very refreshing. But anyway, so I'm going to tell you guys. So next week we have, I think Roth Wolf is coming on channel. I'm going to try to get some of the foreign policy specialists on channel. Freddie DeBoer is coming on in about a month to talk about educational policy. Alex Chandler's coming on. Madison and the people from who the Fresh Kills podcast is coming on. Yeah, Ross is coming on to talk about the New York left after Occupy. What about Alex Jones? Helena Sheehan's autobiography. I need to read that. I've read her Marxist Theological Science book, and I think it's pretty good. Although, anyway. Yeah, we're going to talk about Freddie's book on education and the new atheist movement, I'm guessing. But yeah, when I'm writing a book, I feel like there's always more to read and know, and I'm kind of having to. We're kind of writing this as a book of essays, on Lash, explaining elements of Lash, and maybe criticizing Lash actually. Um, uh, to kind of flesh it out. I think Lash is very good on early stuff. I don't hate Occupy. That's a myth. Occupy was just the death of a certain kind of leftism. Like that's all. I mean, I actually at the time wrote that it was important, and that that it was going to fail and had to. Um, well, Ross is one of the few people, one of the few leftists I've met IRL. So, um, and I met Ross actually around Occupy. I think what Occupy finished off, which is this kind of 90s anarcho-socialism, which is sort of emerging in an inchoate way again, but not in the actually in a much more social democratic way. Um, so we'll be doing that. I'm also back on Pop the Left, I think. There's definitely back on Theorizing with a Hammer. I need to talk to Doug Lane about what we're even doing on Pop the Left this week, if we're doing it at all. So Erica comes on. Erica will come on about every 2 weeks or so. See Chris's take on Pop. Pop, what do you mean? Who's Chris and why do I care? I really hate online debates. I think they're dumb. Oh, he had a take on Pop the Left? Or did it or do you mean what did he say on Doug's podcast? That's not Pop the Left, by the way. That's Inside Diet Soap in the Parrot Room or whatever. No. Yeah. Catrone argues by assertion. I have no idea when we're releasing any more science. We've worked out a contract deal. Um, we've worked out a contract deal with editor on the Patreon, so there should be. Well, I mean, what party would you join, right? Oh, I don't hate everything Catrone says. I just was in his organization, and after being in his organization for a year and a half and reading the reading list and listening to him, I don't think anyone actually completely knows if he really sees Marxism as something that can separate from bourgeois liberal society or as some kind of natural development from it. And yeah, Christopher Life critique was from the right. No, he was not from the right. Um, whose destiny is why I hate him? I don't know. YouTubers confuse me. I only do this because I don't want to pay an editor for another podcast. Well, okay, here's the thing. As I actually agree with Chris that any workers' movement will have a variety of ideas in it, socially and politically, that have to be hashed out within the movement itself. And I think that's true. Um, I so anyway, so Alex, talk about Catherine Liu tomorrow. Next week, Ross Wolf. Week after that, I don't know. Erica will be back on sometime. Madison from Fresh Kills and Joe will be on. I'm also going to get some more foreign policy people to come on, and I will get some more people to talk about different regions of the world. Yeah, I'm going to end on this. Lash was embraced by the right after he was dead, and because of the legacy of his daughter, who was a conservative. And like his daughter gave the rights to a conservative to write his biography, for example. We have interviewed people who knew Lash personally. He was not a right winger. He at worst was Wendell Berry-ish when he died, so he became some kind of like communitarian. But he considered himself a socialist most of his life. He was embraced by the right once he was buried, and I tried to embrace him actually around cultural narcissism, but he wrote an entire book to repudiate the right-wing readings of his work. And even when he, quote, gave up on the left, unquote, in 1987 in a Tikkun debate, it's irrelevant. Like he's not writing about the right. Like he spends more time critiquing conservatives than he does anyone else. So, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because you just need to read the book. Do you think Barry Rice would read your book? I don't know. Maybe. Who cares? A lot of people read my book. I don't care who reads my book. If Barry Rice reads my book, and it's not just mine, by the way, it's also Shalon Ventine's. If Barry Rice reads our book and learns something from it, great. And if she doesn't, great. And if she tweets something stupid about it, I'm just gonna ignore it. I'm writing a book on Christopher Lash with Shalon Ventine. Yeah, I don't think Revolts. The issue with Revolts of the Elites is he didn't think it was finished. I don't know that he would have changed his thesis on it. And I just know that from 2 interviews. So I'm telling you what other people who worked with him told me. But it did come out after his death because his daughter published it. So, and he was not able to finish it to his abilities because he was dying. But yeah, but I think Lash is super important. I think Lash talking about bureaucratic drift, progressivism sucking out the souls of populism and socialism. All the things are true. And he does develop them in his early books and very well, I think. No, if you can tell me an expert to talk about Armenia and the Caucasus, I would love to know more about it. I'm trying to figure out what's going on over there, and I get confused. I know something about Armenia and Azerbaijan having some serious military tensions, but I don't know what to make of it. I'm sure, anyway. And on that note, I am going to get some rest. I hope you enjoyed the poems. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And I have told you who's going to be on the show. Sometimes when I pop on like this when I have a little bit of extra time. And I did today. I'm ahead on my work. So see ya. Erica will probably be coming on in a few weeks, too, because Eric and I just like to. I think Erica is my semi-regular shoot the shit and correct my pronunciation partner. So, so yeah. All right, peeps. Over and out.